What if the man who once made you believe in forever was the same one who shattered your world and sent you running from the only city you ever called home? How do you confront the ghost of your past when he walks back into your life not as the lover you lost, but as the authority figure who now dictates your every move? Can a single decision made in desperation years ago lead to a reunion that forces you to question everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and yourself? Christian stared out the window of his Chicago apartment, the skyline a pale imitation of the one he had left behind in New York. 5 years had passed since he packed 2 suitcases and boarded a one-way flight, leaving behind more than a job at Apex Marketing. He had left Jonathan. The name still caught in his throat like smoke from a fire that refused to die. They had met 3 years earlier in the sleek glass tower overlooking Madison Avenue. Christian was the creative director with the easy laugh and the sketches that won clients over. Jonathan was the account manager, quiet and precise, the kind of man whose calm exterior hid a storm of ambition and vulnerability. Their first conversation had been over lukewarm coffee in the break room, but by the end of that week they were sharing late-night strategy sessions that turned into something deeper. Stolen kisses in the stairwell, whispered promises during weekend escapes to Brooklyn brownstones, and the kind of connection that made the rest of the world feel distant and irrelevant. They kept it hidden because that was the only way it could survive. Jonathan came from old money, a family whose name opened doors and whose expectations closed them just as fast. Christian's own parents back in Ohio still sent him Christmas cards addressed to "Our successful son," without ever asking why he never brought anyone home. For 2 years they built a fragile world of their own. Dinners in tiny West Village restaurants where no one knew their names, quiet mornings in Jonathan's apartment, where the city hummed below them like an approving audience. Christian remembered the way Jonathan's hand would find his under the table, the way his voice would soften when he said, "This is real, Chris. We'll figure it out." Those words had felt like armor. Then the armor cracked. Jonathan's father discovered a single text message on a forgotten phone. The confrontation happened in the family's Hamptons house on a rainy Saturday. Christian was not invited, but he heard every detail later from Jonathan's tear-streaked face. He said if I didn't end it, he'd make sure you never worked in this city again. He has friends on the board at Apex. He can ruin you. The ultimatum was clear. Jonathan, torn between the man he loved and the family that defined him, chose the path of least immediate destruction. He ended things in a dimly lit conference room after hours, his voice steady even as his hands shook. "I can't lose everything, Christian. And I won't let you lose it either." 2 days later, Christian's boss called him in and cited irreconcilable performance issues. The severance check felt like blood money. New York, the city that had once felt like possibility, now felt like exile. He left without a goodbye party, without telling most of his friends the real reason. Only a handful knew, and even they offered the same hollow comfort. It's for the best. In Chicago, he started over at a mid-size agency called Horizon. The work was smaller, the pay was less, but the anonymity was a mercy. He threw himself into campaigns for local brands, stayed late, learned new software, and slowly climbed. Nights were harder. He joined a support group for gay men dealing with family rejection and workplace discrimination. There he met Marcus, a bartender who became a steady friend, the kind who listened without judgment. "You're allowed to grieve him," Marcus would say over cheap beer. Christian dated a few times, nice guys, stable jobs, no drama. But every touch felt like a translation of something he had lost. He told himself he was healing. He told himself New York was just a chapter. Yet every time he saw a skyline on television or heard a certain song from their shared playlist, the ache returned sharper than before. 5 years later, he was 32, lead strategist at Horizon, with a reputation that had begun to travel. Headhunters called. Offers came from bigger cities. Then one Tuesday morning his phone rang with a New York area code. The voice on the other end belonged to Elena Voss, the new chair of Apex Marketing's board. "We've grown since you left, Christian. We need fresh leadership. The CEO position is yours if you want it. Come home." He sat in silence for a long minute, the Chicago skyline blurring outside his window. "Home. The word tasted dangerous. He asked only one question. Who's still there? Elena's answer was careful. Most of the old team moved on. Jonathan Hale is still head of accounts. The name landed like a stone in still water. Christian closed his eyes and felt the old fear and the old longing collide. He thought of the man who had chosen family over love, the man who had watched him leave without fighting. Then he thought of the version of himself who had survived Chicago, who had learned to stand tall without anyone's permission. I'll take it, he said. The decision was made in that single breath. He gave notice at Horizon, packed the same 2 suitcases that had carried him away, and booked a flight back to the city that had once forced him out. As the plane climbed above Lake Michigan, he allowed himself one quiet promise. This time he would not run. This time he would decide what happened next. The city lights of New York appeared on the horizon like a dare, and Christian met them with a steady gaze. Whatever waited for him there, whatever role Jonathan now held, he was no longer the man who had been forced to leave. He was returning as someone new. The first week back in New York felt like stepping into a dream that had aged 5 years. Christian rented a modest 1-bedroom in Hell's Kitchen, close enough to the Apex Tower but far enough from the old neighborhoods that held memories. He spent the weekend unpacking, hanging the same framed sketch of the Brooklyn Bridge that had traveled with him to Chicago, and reminding himself that the city had changed too. Skyscrapers had risen higher, new cafes dotted every corner, and the energy felt sharper, faster. He told himself he was ready. Monday arrived with crisp September air and the familiar hum of the elevator in the Apex building. Christian wore a charcoal suit tailored in Chicago, a quiet upgrade from the younger man who had once worn off-the-rack shirts. The executive floor welcomed him with polite nods and a corner office that still smelled of fresh paint. Elena introduced him to the team in a brief all-hands meeting. Faces had changed, but a few remained. When Jonathan's name was called, Christian felt the room tilt. Jonathan stood near the back, taller than Christian remembered, shoulders broader under a navy suit. Their eyes met for the first time in 5 years. Jonathan's expression flickered. Surprise, then something guarded and unreadable. Christian kept his voice level as he addressed the room. I'm here to move us forward. Past is past. Let's build something better. The words were for everyone, but they landed heaviest on the one man who had once known every corner of his heart. After the meeting, Jonathan lingered by the coffee station. Christian had expected this. Christian, Jonathan said quietly, the name carrying the weight of everything unsaid. I didn't know it would be you. Christian poured himself a cup, keeping his hands steady. Neither did I. Life has a sense of humor. They stood in awkward silence, the kind that stretched between 2 people who had once finished each other's sentences. Jonathan's eyes searched his face. You look good. Chicago treated you well. Christian offered a small smile that did not reach his eyes. It taught me a lot. How about you? Still climbing the ladder? The question carried an edge he had not planned. Jonathan's jaw tightened. I'm head of accounts now. The firm grew. I stayed. There it was, the quiet admission that while Christian had been forced out, Jonathan had remained. The air between them crackled with old pain and new power. Christian was no longer the junior creative begging for understanding. He was the CEO. The dynamic had flipped, and both men felt it. The days that followed were a careful dance. Christian dove into strategy sessions, reviewing campaigns that bore Jonathan's fingerprints. He noticed the subtle improvements Jonathan had made, sharper targeting, stronger client retention. Part of him felt proud. Another part resented how easily Jonathan had continued without him. In private moments, Christian replayed their last conversation in the conference room all those years ago. The way Jonathan had said, I can't lose everything, still echoed. Christian had lost everything that day, his job, his city, his sense of safety. Now he held the keys. The temptation to use that power was real, yet something deeper held him back. He had not returned for revenge. He had returned to prove he could stand on his own. One evening after a late strategy meeting, Christian stayed behind in his office. The city lights glittered beyond the glass wall. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus in Chicago. "How's the Lion's Den?" Christian typed back a single word: complicated. He set the phone down and opened the old folder he had kept hidden in his cloud drive. A collection of photos from their time together. Jonathan laughing on the High Line. Jonathan asleep on his couch with a half-finished report on his chest. The images hurt less now, but they still pulled at something inside him. He closed the folder and stared at his reflection in the dark window. The man looking back was stronger, more certain. Yet the boy who had loved Jonathan still lived somewhere behind his eyes. Jonathan, meanwhile, sat in his own office 2 floors down, staring at the same skyline. He had spent 5 years trying to forget. He had dated women his family approved of, attended the right events, climbed the ranks with quiet determination. But the emptiness had never left. Seeing Christian again, now the boss, now the one in control, stirred every buried feeling. Part of him wanted to apologize. Part of him wanted to demand why Christian had never fought harder to stay. Mostly he felt the terrifying possibility that the love they had buried might not be dead after all. He picked up his phone, hovered over Christian's new company contact, then set it down. Some doors were better left closed. Or so he told himself. The week ended with a team dinner at a rooftop restaurant in Midtown. Christian sat at the head of the table, listening to updates and offering thoughtful feedback. Jonathan sat 3 seats away, contributing when asked but otherwise quiet. Their eyes met across the table more than once. Each glance carried a question neither man voiced. As the evening wound down, Christian stepped onto the terrace for air. Jonathan followed a minute later. The city stretched below them, alive and indifferent. "We need to talk," Jonathan said softly. Christian turned, the wind tugging at his tie. "We do. But not here. Not yet." The words were gentle yet firm. Jonathan nodded, understanding the boundary. For the first time in 5 years, both men felt the fragile possibility of a new beginning hovering just out of reach. The city that had once forced them apart now held them together in the same building, the same story, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. October brought falling leaves and rising tension at Apex. Christian's first major initiative, a complete rebrand for their largest client, required daily collaboration between creative and accounts. That meant Jonathan's team and Christian's vision colliding in conference rooms and late-night emails. They were professional, almost painfully so. Christian praised Jonathan's market analysis in group meetings. Jonathan delivered crisp presentations without ever lingering on personal matters. Yet everyone in the room sensed the undercurrent. Whispers started in the break room. "Didn't they used to?" No one finished the sentence. The past had a way of leaking through the cracks. One rainy Thursday, the client requested an emergency revision. Christian called an all-night session. The team ordered Thai food and spread storyboards across the long table. By midnight, only Christian and Jonathan remained. The others sent home with instructions to return early. The rain tapped against the glass like impatient fingers. Jonathan rubbed his eyes and slid a revised deck across the table. "This version keeps the emotional core you wanted while hitting the new metrics." Christian studied it, then looked up. "It's good. Better than good. You always knew how to balance what I wanted with what the client needed." The compliment slipped out before he could catch it. Jonathan's shoulders relaxed a fraction. Some things don't change. Silence settled between them, thick with everything they were not saying. Christian leaned back. "Why did you stay, Jonathan? After everything?" The question had waited 5 years. Jonathan stared at the rain-streaked window. "Because running felt like admitting defeat. My family expected me to keep climbing. I thought if I stayed and succeeded, maybe the guilt would fade." He met Christian's eyes. It never did. Christian felt the old ache rise but refused to let it pull him under. "I had to run. You made sure of that." The words were not angry, only honest. Jonathan flinched. "I thought I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself." The truth landed softly yet heavily. Neither man raised his voice. The rain continued its steady rhythm. Jonathan spoke again, quieter. I never stopped thinking about you. Every campaign I touched, I wondered what you would have said. Christian allowed himself a small, tired smile. And here I am, saying it as your boss. The irony drew a reluctant laugh from both of them. The sound felt like the first crack in a long frozen lake. They finished the revisions at 3 in the morning, walking out together into the empty lobby. Jonathan hesitated at the door. Coffee sometime? Just to clear the air. Christian considered it. Maybe. When the rebrand is done. It was not a yes, but it was not a no. They parted under the awning, umbrellas blooming like fragile shields. The following weeks tested every boundary. Christian's family called from Ohio, sensing something in his voice during Sunday calls. He still had not told them he was gay, let alone that the man who had once broken his heart now reported to him. His mother asked if he was seeing anyone. Christian gave the same vague answer he had used for years. The lie tasted heavier now. Jonathan faced his own pressures. His father's birthday dinner loomed, a formal affair where the same expectations waited. Jonathan attended alone, smiling through toasts and avoiding questions about his personal life. Late that night he sat on his couch staring at an old photo on his phone. Christian and him on the Staten Island ferry, wind in their hair, eyes bright with possibility. He deleted it, then immediately regretted the action. Some memories refused deletion. At the office, the rebrand gained momentum. Client feedback was glowing. Christian sent a company-wide email crediting Jonathan's team for key insights. The gesture was genuine and public. Jonathan replied with a short, professional note of thanks. In the elevator later that day, they stood side by side for the first time since the late-night session. Jonathan spoke first. That email meant something. Christian kept his eyes on the descending numbers. You earned it. The doors opened on the lobby and they stepped out together into the evening crowd. For a moment the city felt less like a battlefield and more like a witness. Neither man knew what would come next, but both sensed the ground shifting beneath them. The forced departure that had once defined them was slowly transforming into something neither had planned, a second chance disguised as professional necessity. The question was whether they were brave enough to take it. November arrived with colder winds and clearer truths. The rebrand launched successfully, boosting Apex stock and earning Christian his first feature in Adweek. The article praised bold new leadership and mentioned Jonathan's contributions in the same paragraph. Christian read it in his office, a quiet pride mixing with the strange new reality that their names were linked again in public, this time for achievement rather than scandal. He forwarded the article to Jonathan with a single line, "Well earned." Jonathan's reply came 10 minutes later, "Thank you. Dinner to celebrate the team." Christian stared at the screen. The invitation felt like a bridge. After a long pause, he typed back, "Saturday. Neutral ground." They chose a small Italian restaurant in the Flatiron district, far from both their old haunts and the office. Christian arrived first, choosing a corner table where they could speak without being overheard. Jonathan walked in wearing a dark coat, snowflakes melting on his shoulders. He looked tired but resolved. They ordered wine and pasta, the conversation starting safely with client wins and market trends. Then Jonathan set his glass down. "I owe you an apology. Not the careful one I gave back then. A real one." Christian waited. Jonathan continued, voice low. "I was terrified. My father threatened to cut me off, to expose you to the board. I convinced myself ending things was the only way to save us both. I was wrong. I should have fought. I should have chosen you." The words hung between them like smoke. Christian felt the old wound open, but this time it bled cleanly. "I needed to hear that, but I also needed to become the man who didn't need saving." Jonathan nodded. "You did. And now you're the one calling the shots. Feels right, somehow." They talked for hours, about Chicago winters, about Jonathan's failed attempts at arranged dates, about the nights Christian had stared at the ceiling wondering if he would ever feel that alive again. No raised voices, no accusations. Only the slow untangling of 5 years of silence. When the check came, neither moved to leave. Jonathan asked the question they had both been circling. "What now, Chris?" Christian looked at him across the candlelight. "Now we decide if we can work together without letting the past destroy the present. Or if we're brave enough to see if anything is still there." The honesty felt dangerous and necessary. They left the restaurant and walked through quiet streets, snow beginning to fall again. At the corner where their paths diverged, Jonathan turned. "I never stopped loving you. I just stopped believing I deserved to." Christian's breath caught. "I never stopped either. I just learned how to live without it." They did not kiss. They did not promise. They simply stood in the snow, two men who had once been boys in love, now shaped by choices and consequences. The city watched silently, offering no judgment, only the possibility of tomorrow. Monday at the office felt different. The team noticed the subtle shift, easier collaboration, fewer guarded glances. Christian and Jonathan still kept boundaries sharp during work hours, but the air between them had softened. One afternoon Jonathan brought coffee to Christian's office without being asked. "Black, 2 sugars." "Still your order." Christian accepted the cup with a small smile. Some things don't change. The moment was brief, but it felt like the first real breath they had taken together in years. Outside, the window snow continued to fall, blanketing the city that had once forced them apart. Now it seemed to be giving them a clean slate, one careful step at a time. The role that had brought Christian back as boss had become the very thing that allowed them to see each other clearly for the first time since the exile began. The story was far from over, but for the first time both men believed it might have a different ending. December brought holiday parties and family pressures that tested every fragile bridge they had rebuilt. Apex held its annual gala at the plaza. Christian stood on stage delivering a speech about growth and second chances, his eyes finding Jonathan in the crowd more than once. Jonathan listened, pride and longing mixed in his expression. After the applause, Jonathan's father approached Christian near the bar. The older man's handshake was firm, his smile practiced. "Impressive work, Mr. Hale. My son speaks highly of your leadership." Christian kept his face neutral. "Jonathan has been instrumental." The conversation stayed polite, but Christian felt the old threat beneath the surface. Later Jonathan pulled him aside on the terrace. "He doesn't know we're talking again." "I haven't told him." Christian nodded. "We don't owe him that yet." The word "yet" lingered between them like a promise neither had voiced. The weeks that followed brought private dinners, long walks in Central Park, and careful conversations about the years apart. Jonathan shared how he had come out to his sister in secret but never to his parents. Christian spoke about the support group in Chicago and the nights he had almost boarded a plane back to New York only to stop himself. They did not rush. They let trust grow in small moments. A shared laugh over burnt cookies in Christian's kitchen. A quiet hand on the shoulder when one of them admitted doubt. Work remained professional, but the team sensed the change and respected it. Then the crisis arrived. A major client threatened to pull their account after a competitor leaked old rumors about personal entanglements at Apex. The rumors pointed directly at Christian and Jonathan's past. Jonathan's father called immediately, demanding a meeting. Christian sat in his office reading the email thread, feeling the old fear rise. This time he refused to run. He called Jonathan in. "We face this together or we let it define us again." Jonathan's eyes steadied. Together, they prepared a statement emphasizing professionalism and past performance. Christian also prepared a personal letter to his own parents, finally telling them the truth about who he was and who he loved. The act felt like shedding the last weight of the original exile. The client meeting went better than expected. Christian's calm leadership and Jonathan's detailed recovery plan saved the account. That evening they walked along the East River, coats pulled tight against the wind. Jonathan stopped under a street lamp. "I'm proud of us. Both of us." Christian turned to him. "Me too. And I'm ready to see what comes next if you are." Their first kiss in 5 years was soft and certain, snowflakes melting on their cheeks. It was not the passionate rush of their youth. It was the kiss of two men who had survived loss, power shifts, and societal judgment and still chose each other. The city lights reflected in the water like quiet applause. The role that had once forced Christian to leave had become the catalyst that brought them home to each other. Spring arrived with blooming cherry trees and a new chapter neither man had dared imagine. Christian and Jonathan made their relationship public at the office in the quietest way possible. A joint announcement at the quarterly meeting stating they were together and committed to keeping personal and professional boundaries clear. The team responded with genuine support. Elena smiled and said, "About time." Jonathan's sister flew in from Boston to meet Christian officially. Hugging him like a brother she had waited years to welcome. Christian's parents drove from Ohio, nervous but determined. Over dinner they listened as their son explained his journey. His mother cried, then hugged him tightly. "We just want you happy." The words healed something deep. Challenges remained. Jonathan's father struggled with acceptance, but Jonathan set clear boundaries. "I love him, Dad. That won't change." The older man eventually attended a company event and shook Christian's hand without reservation. Small victories accumulated. They moved into a shared apartment overlooking the Hudson, filled with new memories and old sketches. Christian proposed on a quiet Sunday morning with a simple ring and the words, "We already survived the hard part. Let's build the rest." Jonathan said yes before the question was fully asked. The story that began with a forced departure ended with a choice freely made. Christian stood on their balcony one evening, Jonathan's arms around him, watching the city lights. The man who had once been exiled had returned not as a victim but as a leader, a partner, and finally himself. Jonathan rested his chin on Christian's shoulder. "We made it," Christian smiled. "We did more than that. We became the men we were always meant to be." The skyline stretched before them, no longer a reminder of loss but a witness to resilience. In the end, the role that had flipped their world had simply given them the chance to write a better ending. One rooted in honesty, growth, and the kind of love that survives every storm. In reflecting on Christian and Jonathan's journey, I see how exile and return can reshape identity in profound ways. The story reveals that love tested by betrayal and power can emerge stronger when both people choose honesty over fear. Societal pressures and family expectations often force impossible choices, yet the courage to face the past and redefine the future creates space for authentic connection. Their experience teaches that personal growth is rarely linear, but every difficult decision carries the seed of renewal. Ultimately, this tale affirms that coming home to oneself and to another is possible when we stop running and start building on the truth we have earned.